How do you explain nature? How do you explain all that? And so I always remembered that I had no comeback to that particular statement at all. And so flash forward to when I got to San Francisco State. San Francisco State played a major part in my development and in my life. Because San Francisco State University, there's a legacy there, a major legacy that I didn't know about. When I was at the junior college vegetating, I kind of dropped out of junior college because education wasn't relevant to me. So I kind of dropped out. I think kind of dropped out because I stopped going to class, but I went and hung out in the library and I just read. I read whatever I wanted to read. I was cutting though, you know what I'm saying? And so when they sent me a thing in the mail, you are subject to disqualification. Your GPA is 1.90. I said, yikes, right? So I said, all right, let me get back. And so the education started becoming relevant to me. You know, I like history and sociology, psychology, GE classes and stuff, but it became relevant to me. So there was a professor who came from San Francisco State to give a talk during Black History, and when she threw down, the first thing I said was, that's what I should be learning. Having been a child of the 60s, having grown up in boom, when she was throwing down about the nature of racism, things like that, I said, that's what I should be learning. I said, where are you from? She said, I'm from San Francisco State University. Well, San Francisco State University at that time had one of the top 10 communications departments in the country. And so I was interested in communication, producing, directing, radio, TV, behind the scenes stuff. And so she said she was from San Francisco State, and I said, oh, San Francisco State, that's a communications thing too. I said, I'm going to San Francisco State. And so when I went to San Francisco State, I didn't know that San Francisco State had the longest student strike in this country's history, 1968-69. It was the longest and probably bloodiest student strike in history. One of the reasons why you have campus police was because of San Francisco State. Because Ronald Reagan was a governor at that time. And Ronald Reagan allowed cops to come on campuses and was beating people down, right? Well, universities began to say, okay, we can't have that type of environment, so they came up with campus police, right? That was one of the reasons was because of San Francisco State. So cops were brought on campus, people was getting beat down. Danny Glover was in the strike at San Francisco State. Matter of fact, they had a commemoration, 40-year commemoration of the strike that I participated in a couple weeks ago, and Danny Glover was there, so on and so forth. But Danny Glover was in the strike. Danny Glover was actually one of the leaders of the strike in 1968. Again, I was 10 at the time. And so, being at San Francisco State now, I'm looking at this tradition of activism, child of the 60s. And now I'm looking at this tradition of activism. And there was a film on the strike, and we watched the film on the strike, and I was just taking stuff in. I actually went through a process where I got to San Francisco State, and I just started sitting in on classes that I didn't have. Because they were Black Studies classes. And San Francisco State had the first Black Studies program in the country. San Francisco State, the first one in the country, was there as a result of the strike. And so I'm going to Black Studies classes just sitting in. I don't even have the class. But I'm just taking stuff in, taking things in. And so then it was kind of like time to come out. And so at San Francisco State, I was the co-founder of the Afro-American Cultural Workshop Committee, which was an organization that was in the dorms. Because they showed a racist cartoon, and then we got with them, and they said, well, why don't you come up with ideas of what programs to do? So we said, okay. So we came up with the Afro-American Cultural Workshop Committee, and we organized ourselves in the dorms. And so we were doing that for a while, and then we decided to move out of the dorms. But if we moved out of the dorms, we couldn't be a part of the AACWC. So we went up on campus, and we reactivated the Pan-African Student Union. And so in reactivating the Pan-African Student Union, we got active on campus. We already knew the people in the dorms. We had a base in the dorms because we had been there. Now we were on campus. And so with the Pan-African Student Union, we were dealing with issues that were basically campus issues. And one of the things we found out was this, that after the student strike at San Francisco State, what came out of it was, you know how y'all have, on this campus, y'all have the School of Science or the College of Science? It's college or school? School. School of Science, School of Social Sciences, School of, right? Well, the San Francisco State had a School of Ethnic Studies. The only one in the country. Department of Black Studies, Department of Asian American Studies, Department of La Raza Studies, Department of Native American Studies. The only one in the country that came about as a result of the strike. And so what we did was we got on campus and we started researching. And we found out that, wait a minute, this ain't really a school. The administration is just calling it a school, but it ain't really a school. Because at the head of each school was a dean. And they had a director. So it was actually a department of ethnic studies with a director. And so we saw as our responsibility that the ones before us in 1968, they got this ethnic studies department here, and it was supposed to be a school. Now it's our turn in the early 80s. We're in our 20s now. It's our turn. So now what we have to do is we have to make the School of Ethnic Studies an actual school with a dean. And so through the Pan-African Student Union, that became one of our major projects. It's got to be a school with a dean. Just like the School of Science, just like the School of Humanities, the School of Ethnic Studies, right? And so we were dealing with those issues. Now while we're dealing with all this, we used to have this, you know, in college we have intellectual discussions and stuff. And so we used to go down to the cafeteria and beat up white boys, intellectually. And we would go down there and get into intellectual discussions and just whoop them up, right? But then it got to a point where it's all right, man. When we would have our discussions, we would say like, okay, man, what is it that all black people have to work on? What is it that this is a burning question for me. What is it that all black people have to work on, no matter what part of the movement they're in? What is it that all black people have to work on? And we used to sit around and try to discuss, like, what is it? And we couldn't, and I remember I couldn't figure it out. What is it? Okay, I'll come back to that in a minute, but this was a burning question, okay? In 1980, let me go back, in 1980, Ronald Reagan became president of the United States. President. And I'm just going to be real with you. That was the last day I smoked weed. I wasn't a Muslim then. But me and the brothers was sitting around, well, he was hanging out. And so I said, man, this is my last joint. I said, what you talking about? This is my last joint. Say, this is your last joint. I said, hey man, check this out. Remember during the strike, Ronald Reagan was governor. S.I. Hayakawa was president of the university. Now, Ronald Reagan is president, and S.I. Hayakawa is a state senator. They have more power now. And so for me, what that meant was the movement is getting ready to get serious. I mean serious. So I said, this is my last joint. I ain't smoking no more. And that was my last joint, the day that Ronald Reagan won the presidency. And not long after he won the presidency, black children were getting killed in Atlanta, snatched up the street, and their bodies were ended up in the river. 4 black women were shot coming out of a store in Memphis, Tennessee. Black men were being hung again. Hung in places down the south, because Ronald Reagan told each state, I will give you states' rights. And if you know anything about history, American history and black history, states' rights meant that the states can do anything they want to their black population. Ronald Reagan said, I will give you I will grant you states' rights. And the racist attacks skyrocketed. Police brutality skyrocketed. And so for us, and for me, it was an understanding that the movement is going to get deeper. Now there's something else that happened within me. And I'm leading up to a thing. When I left Philly in 1974, Philadelphia was there were still remnants of the movement left. Although the Panthers were being vamped on, Martin was dead, of course Malcolm was dead, many of our leaders were being killed, and so on and so forth. But there were still remnants of the movement still left.